skills that one needs to interact with these systems is changing over time. It's going to be, and this I think is what separates, say, the influencers from the actual working artists. And here at Adobe, we've actually developed a pretty rigorous rubric for what quality means. How well does this represent global diversity in the people that are showing up? How accurate is this to the cultural milieu that I'm trying to represent? Practitioners, as people making the tools, we need to continually be asking ourselves, what are the possible vectors for harm, and then also what are the vectors for positivity. But I would hope that anybody who is a creator, whether they're using traditional tools or even these generative AI tools, be very deliberate and be very thoughtful about anything you make has an effect on the world.
Welcome to a new episode of XR and AI Spotlight, the show where we give the stage to creative, technologists, founders, entrepreneurs who are pushing the boundaries at the intersection between XR and AI. My name is Gabriele Romagnoli, I'm your host, and I'm here today with Daniel Robbins. Daniel Robbins is a principal designer at Adobe, working on both strategy and production across all 3D AR VR projects with a focus on generative AI. Dan regularly mentors sponsor people from underrepresented groups who are entering the design field, and he brings a passion for joy, equity, anti-racism, and justice through the lenses of curiosity, compassion, and contradiction. Join these episodes to learn the current limitation and future opportunities in GenAI, the approach creatives should have to improve their proficiency with GenAI tools, the importance and implication of diversity and equity in generative AI, and how AI will enhance and complement XR experiences. But before we get into it, I wanted to thank the sponsor for today, Cognitive 3D, who made this episode possible. Cognitive 3D is an analytic platform to improve how organizations can analyze user behavior in VR and AR and turn the findings into actionable insight. Cognitive 3D has an ND SDK that integrates easily in Unity and Unreal. Data are collected and displayed in 3D contextually to help you improve user engagement and retention. Whether you are designing training or simulation, running consumer research, or creating games and entertainment content, Cognitive 3D will change the way you track and learn from your data. Head to cognitive3d.com to learn more. And now, let's roll the title and welcome Daniel on stage. How do you use AI in your creative process right now?
So generally, there are two parts of the process where I find it most useful. One is around ideation, which is helping expand the scope of what I might be considering. I'm only one person, and it's great to amplify that with lots of different visual inputs. So that's when I'm trying to figure out new ways of thinking about usually a visual problem. The other part is details around production, aspects of production that might be tedious for me to do, that still allow me to express my craft. So these could be things such as I need to, change the aspect ratio of an element. I need to change the resolution. I might need to add some other element to something, but fundamentally it is still my work, and I'm using the generative AI to extend my own vision.
Right. And let's say that from the perspective of a creative nowadays, since you are building tools, right, at Adobe, and that span across different modality of input. So what are the, let's say, skills you think and knowledge that a creative really needs to develop in order to not go beyond using this tool, but really start mastering them?
Thank you. And I want to first acknowledge that we are at a moment in time where much of this technology is very new. So if one were to look at what people are creating now and what the dialogue is about, it is often about what we sometimes think of as prompt engineering. How do people best describe to these systems in ways that give them the results they want. I think that is a moment in time, and we hope as we develop new tools and new kinds of inputs that people can use much richer ways of talking to. So what I'm trying to say is the skills that one needs to interact with these systems is changing over time. Right now, it's very much how do you craft prompts, how do you save your work, how do you learn from your work so that you can iteratively get better results. Over time, that's going to change very much. It's going to be a very interesting conversation between the craftsperson and these systems, where I can bring in everything from sketches, text again, videos I may have created somewhere else, and we're doing work around how can I use 3D models to influence what the generative systems do. So that's sort of the broad view, but very specifically on the skills, it requires the ability to track the changes that are happening in industry, of course, but also understand, and this I think is what separates, say, the influencers from the actual working artists, to really understand what the quality bars are on the different techniques. It's very easy to get very excited about some of the output we see, but it's also easy to forget that behind that is actually hours of iterative work of people probing where the limits are on each of these different techniques. If I'm doing something like text to video, you'll notice a lot of those clips are very short, say they're 4 seconds clips. And that's because people are realizing that beyond that, you lose coherence and stability with the current technology. So again, to come back to the question, it is really the key aspects are being able to iterate in conversation with these systems and being able to understand what the quality bars are.
And I mean, I want to dive a little bit into this because I think that you go there, you start creating, you start adding some prompts. And how do you understand where the quality bar is? Is that basically a matter of going there, trying again, and pushing and persisting, or there is more to it than just trying it out?
So I would say what I would say to any artist using any tool, whether it be an analog tool or a digital tool or a new AI tool, which is first have in mind what you want to make and have your own quality bar. Whether I'm using a paintbrush or a digitizing tablet, or I'm in conversation with an AI. I think part of the artist's mission is to really wrestle with these tools in a healthy way to have my own quality bar. So it's some of it is understanding what the tool can do, but much more is the artist maintaining their own standards and not letting the tool necessarily compromise those standards. So that's at the sort of very high level. If we get down to the actual tools that are in market now, or people are using experimentally, I would say yes, it's figure out what all the degrees of freedom are for that tool. Some of them are length of prompts, some of them are specificity of the words, some of them are negative prompts, some of them are tunings about adherence or style references and other kinds of inputs. And as you're using all of these, a good artist, again, coming back to the idea of a paintbrush, if I'm using different kinds of paint and medium, I am going to be pretty introspective about how those different materials interact. So likewise, if I'm adjusting things for an AI, I need to be very introspective, which might mean just taking notes, whether it could be have a spreadsheet and understand how all these things interact, but use the least amount of process necessary for one to actually learn from that. And I'm not going to suggest what the exact tool that one uses to be introspective, but all the people I know who are getting good results or great results, typically we only see what comes out at the end. But if you actually crack open the covers and watch people work, and I've done that in person, next shoulder to shoulder with very talented artists, you will notice that they've got a notebook and they are taking notes all the time. They've got a scratch pad. They've got directories where they're saving things and they're changing the names of things so that they understand how did you get to a certain place. So that would be the very key thing that I would say. Other kinds of things to watch out for, of course, are, in quality has so many different vectors. And here at Adobe, we've actually developed a pretty rigorous rubric for what quality means. I'm not at liberty to share all those different characteristics, but it's something that we have spent quite a while looking at. So there's the typical things around sort of visual quality, how many fingers are in their hands, things like that. how well does it represent sort of the colors and tone that I might be interested in? But then there's, I think, things that operate at a higher level. How well does this represent global diversity in the people that are showing up? How accurate is this to the cultural milieu that I'm trying to represent? If I type in something like dancers, and I'm in the United States, I might get one set of results. But if I'm in India, I might desire a different set of results. So that is also part of the quality bar in terms of appropriateness.
Absolutely. And this is something actually that I want to ask you later, because I think it's a very important topic about basically equity in to some extent, right? In what are the results generated with AI. I do have though one question, because so as you mentioned, you use GenAI yourself for, let's say, a good part of ideation, for example, right? And maybe inspiration, finding like brainstorming. But what do you think needs to happen in order to move beyond that?
Well, part of it is quality. Part of it is actually being able to integrate into existing workflows. I think there is often the impulse amongst technologists to say, okay, I have a new offering, a new technique. This will replace everything you already do. Uh, and I think that really does a disservice to the habits and tools and learning that people have already put into existing workflows. So if I have some sort of an asset coming out of a tool, whether it be an image or a sparse light field like a nerf, if I can't actually integrate that into existing tooling and other kinds of assets, then it becomes just a curiosity. So that is super key. Like you, I'm very excited about a lot of the new 3D spatial representations, but they have severe limitations at this point, which means that there's a ceiling on how to what degree I can adapt them into production work.
Yeah, and I like the word you use, like curiosity. It kind of like at the same time like diminishes and clarifies what something becomes. I still do believe there is a need to let's say be messy and try it and says okay, just to have an understanding. And I think that is also very important. But at the end, having it as part of a workflow, as part of a creation process, there are a few steps that need to go from one idea to a technology to have it something that can be used reproducibly. Let's say that is for sure.
Sure, and I
So,
and I can be much more specific around some of these general technologies. So let's take these new 3D scene representations like NeRFs and Gaussian splats. They're very interesting because they incorporate lighting and various surface characteristics that are not usually captured in photogrammetry. Um, but it is really hard with existing techniques to edit these, to move elements around, because if you move an element around in one of these new representations, you're actually violating the integrity of the lighting and the materials, because they are all very specific to where those light field points or voxels are. That's sort of one characteristic. Another one you might see is, people are doing a lot of work around generating 3D geometry, text to 3D, and with the output being traditional formats such as polygons. But when you look at some of these models and you actually inspect them at the deeper level, is the way the polygons are arranged, or the way the textures might map around these objects, what we call UV mapping, is not geared toward production work. It's not at the level we need. And we will get there, definitely. But I'm just offering this as a cautionary tale to those who might think that they can take these and integrate these initially into existing workflows.
absolutely. And I still think that there are different let's say way potentially to integrate it. For example, if there is a building and that building is it's not properly UV wrapped, maybe the back or the windows do not look nice. But if it's an object that is in the far distance,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe at that point it's not that crucial. So then it's also about indeed understanding what are the limitations of each one of these, and then see being like, does it have a place? And also the point is, you brought up before, what is the artist standard, right? So if I'm an artist, I would be used to, I wonder if we could exploring better our standards, like an artistic standards, and maybe stretching it, we could find better ways or new ways of using this, because that is also another important point.
And I want to reinforce part of that. So you talked about buildings in the background, and often when I hear that, I'm thinking of commercial artists, 3D artists, or other digital artists who are doing work, say, for video games or work for visual effects. And there, time is money. People, of course, want to be wildly creative and have very high quality, but then there are also aspects of the work where people actually need to just get their job done, and they need to have tools that support work at scale. So, I might sculpt one beautiful building that's in the foreground, and then I might say to one of these future systems, hey, give me a whole bunch more buildings that are in the background. But the requirement, I would say, on the artist is being really honest about which things need to be represented at what level of quality. So it's not about replacing the artist in this case, it's about amplifying their work and understanding how do you scale your work, and how, if I can have the AI system of the future amplify my work in one area, maybe that gives me more time to put more of my own hand into the things that are essentially in the foreground.
Yeah, and when you talk about the very often there is this feeling of AI is going to replace artists. And I think that what you just said, and also what I've seen in one of the, let's say, recent video from Adobe, was indeed telling the other way around, telling we made it. Like, we as artists, we have a new way to create. And the core of the mission still revolves around the artist. Daniel, do you mind if I show that short clip just to give an impression of what I'm talking about?
Sure thing, let's roll.
Let me get it.
Sometimes I think about why we do what we do, and the world tells us no. These walls were made to break, and I am breaking through. At times it's hard to show, and I knew I was special. And when I didn't believe, I remember the moment when my family's waiting for me. Oh, 'cause I made it. Yeah, oh, I made it. Oh, I made it. I made it. I made it. Yeah, we made it. 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 'Cause we made it. Yeah, damn, we made it. Oh, we made it. 'Cause we made it.
So indeed, creativity is about the creators, not about the art, right? That is a bit what I've got very strong in a way from the video in a way.
Well, I mean, they're in the tagline for the video. I mean, there's literally 3 words: we made it. So there's the human aspect, there's the action, and then there is the actual artifact that came out of it. And I would say they all hold importance in this. And it's a very deliberately made video, beautiful. And one of the things you'll notice if you look very carefully is almost all of the actions are something where someone is using generative AI to amplify something they're already doing. So I made one of these, now please make me 10 of them with variations. Or I'm a highly skilled photographer, I took this thing and I did tune up a few aspects. And all of these are things that we've been able to do by hand, essentially, but this is saying, how do we do it at scale? How do we do it faster? And how do we let the artist or craftsperson focus on that which, most uses their creativity and their reasoning and critical thinking?
I just wanted to have a quick break to remind you that the recording of these episodes and many more great conversations with incredible experts are available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Just head over to my profile or the episode description, open up the link in bio, and pick your platform of choice. And now, let's get back to the show. So, what are the trade-offs between privacy, trust in a tool, and the magic that you can get out of it?
So first, I want to step back a little bit. So when people talk about privacy, and I'm going to extend that a little bit to sort of broader issues around integrity and trust, often people don't actually know what they want from a given offering. There's a healthy tension between things like privacy and convenience. So whether it be something like a augmented doorknob that someone has on a house that might use biometrics or other behavioral characteristics or environmental sensing, that might offer you a lot of convenience, but on the other hand, it might seem creepy or off-putting that it is sensing things and sensing trends. And this applies whether it be to self-driving cars or physical things in the environment and our digital tools. So the point of what I'm saying is that as we explore these tools, as we bring them to market, as we use them, as we are hopefully deliberate consumers of them, I think it is really important to be honest about what those trade-offs are between convenience and trust. That they are in tension there. So first, I'll just say that as part of the
Yeah.
framework, and that because of that, we need to continually, as practitioners, as people making the tools, we need to continually be asking ourselves, what are the possible vectors for harm, and then also what are the vectors for positivity. Everything has a trade-off there. I mentioned something like being able to type in a prompt like dancer. I get a different result in different cultural venues, different locales. But then there's also other things I should ask. Should the dancers all be what we think of as sort of conventionally Western, thin bodies or lighter complexion? Do I want them to have a more diverse representation? Are they supposed to represent, the way things are in the world now or the way we want the world to be? And I'm not saying that there's a right answer on this, but I would hope that anybody who is a creator, whether they're using, uh, traditional tools or even these generative AI tools, be very deliberate and be very thoughtful about anything you make has an effect on the world. So that again, that's a fairly abstract answer. But if I bring it down to practice and we think about these tools, we think about anytime a tool allows people to operate faster. Uh, there's exciting aspects of that I can do more. Possibly I can make more money. But there's also when we operate faster, we sometimes have a tendency to be less thoughtful. So I hope, if anything, that people get from this conversation is that people, along with running faster, we should be more deliberate and more intentional about how we are using these tools.
Yeah, but then I mean, going back to the dancer example, right? So as an artist, you can totally say, I want a group of Western dancers, right?
Hmm.
Or you could say, I want a group of maybe Southeast Asian dancer playing traditional,
Hmm.
right? And I can be deliberate, right? And I have specified it. But then how do we make it that if I say dancer, I get a diverse result? I mean, how do you bring this level of equity into Gen AI?
So I think what you're asking me is how is the actual offering, that the tool, how does it help me get a more, typically a diverse, more representative set? There's a bunch of ways. Sometimes we call that debiasing, which is the ability to tune the outputs. Often it is around the actual training set. So if you imagine that these different AI systems, whether it be from Adobe or another entity, they have a certain corpus of imagery and tagged objects and other artifacts that they're used to train on. Uh, we, especially at Adobe, do a lot of work going into that set and essentially adding weights, which are adding more importance or rankings to those elements in the initial training set that we feel best represent the kinds of things that we hope that creators bring to a broader world. But if you step back even from that, I think it's important to say which inputs are even going into the training set in the first place. There's a wonderful technologist named Novetta Sampson, who's currently at Google, who talks a lot about debiasing is one part of it, but also how can we even how can we be very intentional about who's creating the data set in the first place? Who's holding that camera that's making the stock photos that are then going into the corpus? Who is assigning the tags? So that is an area definitely that open for more exploration. If we essentially give if we create a virtuous circle around who is creating these training sets and then who is tuning them, hopefully we'll get more representative output. And we're seeing very good results there. So that's one end. Another end is that hopefully anybody who is bringing one of these offerings to market also has a very open ear and a compassionate ear, and is soliciting input from various communities. And that could be having sort of advisory boards, but it could also be having reporting systems built into your tool, so that as people are using them and they're using the reporting systems, you take that input and you take it very seriously and you use that to refine subsequent generations of what these tools produce. And then you also see, and then sorry to interrupt, and then you also it's very important to watch what people are making. And notice how is that being used in the broader context. Are these things being used in news stories? Are they being used in educational materials? Are they being used by people who didn't previously have the ability to create such high quality output?
Understand. And there was when you so there are two follow-up questions that I was thinking while you were talking. One being the kind of data that go into these models, right? You used to train them. And there is another important aspect that is, let's say, consent, right? And this is more of a curiosity of mine. And I don't know if you have stumbled on this, but is there a risk, or is that more complicated to get consent from underrepresented communities? Is that do you see that as a problem? Or it says no, so far it didn't happen?
I would reframe it to say it's more of an opportunity to include new voices. And yes, I mean, there's already established principles for when a commercial photographer is out in the public world and they're taking pictures of who they need to get releases from, whether it be a photo, a video, an audio recording, and we should piggyback on that. Ideally, we're also letting people know how that work is going to be used further on as we track the provenance and as we move into a remix economy. So my simple answer is yes. Consent is key in this area, but it's not just consent. It's the two words together: informed consent, letting people understand what is going to be done with this thing. It would be awesome if I could, say, where does a particular image or an element in an image, how is it transmitted through the world? How's it showing up in different places? And Adobe, as with some other entities, is working on around content authenticity initiatives to track how a particular asset or an element of an asset moves through the world. And there's exciting work. I don't know if you saw the announcement from Leica a while ago, where they've actually added at the hardware level the ability to add on to that tracking, so that you really want to make that a closed loop system as much as possible.
Cool. So the other one that followed up is, so you can oversee the data that are fed into the model, and then there is the model itself, right? That sometimes, based on my knowledge, they tends to be some sort of black boxes. How do you? And that is, of course, a very big part of what the model spits out, right? The model itself, how it processes the data. How do you audit a black box?
So I'm not going to give you the specific ways in which we do it within Adobe, but I can give you hints that we have teams, and they tend to be tiered teams. And some parts of them are automated. So there are systems that have essentially certain kinds of quality bars that we can, in an automated way, we can look to see, given the set of prompts, are we getting the output we want? And then we have teams of people internally who do very targeted testing around certain areas, both in terms of positive and negative vectors for harm and bringing good to the world. And then we, as I mentioned before, we listen to the outside world too, because we are only one set of people. We have our own backgrounds and biases. Everybody's come to the table with different biases. So I think a really important pillar, really important leg on the stool is being able to listen to what's happening in the outside world. And that is happening all the time. I can tell you, nothing excites people at Adobe more than seeing what people make with their tools. And that is the that is the internal currency of how people are talk about things, how excited they get about things, is look at the beautiful stuff people make. But to do that, you have to look and you have to listen and you have to put your own pencil down so that you can look at what someone else is drawing.
So this is from a tool perspective, right? And you, as, let's say, someone overseeing this processes, these teams, these tools, I was wondering, what is your take on tech leadership in terms of as a way to foster progress and provide a positive input? What is your take on it?
So if you notice from most of my answers, I usually start at the abstract and the high level before I come down. So again, I'll do the same thing here, which is, you asked us a sentence that presupposes a value of certain concepts. So you said the word progress. In progress, I would say is actually a controversial word. I mean, for some people, they just assume that progress is the correct thing. That progress, which you might define as improvement, or you might uh, interpret it as increasing some quality. And I would say a responsible tech leader is one who should actually ask themselves, is progress always the right thing to do? There's different kinds of leadership. Sometimes leadership is about speed. How quickly do you get something out there? But sometimes it's about doing things in a more moral or ethical way. That is a different kind of progress. So what I'm gently asking you is to not presuppose that progress is always the correct goal. Again, if you think of the very dedicated set of artists out there in the world who are making a living, who are relying on their art and their judgment. Progress is about, again, amplifying what they're doing, helping them do what they do in ways that they are more interested in doing, in more positive ways. But it is not necessarily about always saying, well, now you have to use a new technique. Now you have to use a new piece of software that you haven't previously used. So coming back to your question about what does progress mean in terms of tech leadership, I would say it requires people who can balance business needs, and business needs really are about making sustainable businesses and keeping the lights on, essentially, and to do things like have ethical training sets and to do things like solicit input from the community. That takes resources, and to do resources, you have to have a healthy business. So there is a push and pull there, and it requires an ability to also understand that as technologists, people get into the field often because they do want to always do new shiny things, and so there is a degree to which one has to satiate that to some degree, to give people, to let them unfurl their wings and fly, but to find safe ways to do that. So for instance, where I work, we do a lot of internal prototypes that will never see the light of day. And that's fine. It's totally okay. But the reason we do that is multifaceted. And the reason that our leadership, our technology leaders, have given resource to that is because we have a very distinct understanding that sometimes you actually have to make a thing. You have to, whether it be a tool, whether it be an object, you have to make a thing so that you can understand the contours of it, so that you get a better understanding of how it fits into existing workflows, what its consequences of use might be, and that it's also fun to make things. Ultimately, we would like people, both in within this entity and with outside, to have fun with what they're doing. So coming back again to tech leadership, I would say be very deliberate about what the word progress means, and when it's appropriate and when it's not. Understand that everything around us, at least now in this moment in time, is still made by humans. We have our hands on the levers, and that humans are emotional beings, and that we want to keep people motivated and happy, and also proud of what they make and what that enables other people to make, and that understand it has to be sustainable too, and that's the business side of it, especially if we want to do things that are very ambitious in terms of having a community orientation. So thank you for letting me give that very long answer to your short
No,
question.
I mean, I would interrupt, and I think it makes sense, and I think that progress in no way should be seen as progress in the way even we understand how we can this can be deployed. It doesn't mean progress is a progress necessarily on the tool, but even on our understanding that, I think it's already it's still progress. It's still actually great progress, because that creates the foundation for them building on top of it, right? So I think that indeed the definition of progress here is very important, and thanks for pointing it out. And so you have worked across various fields, right? Still as a creative designer, still as leading teams, but from XR to 3D to AI. And I'm very curious, because those, everybody now throw them in the same bucket because they are, let's say, the latest hot things. Let's say, and I don't agree with it, but I do see how they could be complementary to each other to some extent. What is your take? How do you think 3D, AI, and XR can complement each other?
Thanks. And as someone who personally, I enjoy VR experiences, many of them, and I have a certain my own emotional attachment to them. I would love for those to become offerings that are more compelling to a broader collection of people. The reality is, most people want to be on their phones. They don't want to put a thing on their head, or they want to be out in the world, or they want to be having conversations with people. And there are certain technological limits right now that are impeding market adoption of these immersive technologies. But we'll get there, and I think some of that will be basic physics, whether it be battery life and optics and edge computing, things like that. But there'll also be things that'll make it more compelling around personalization, and that's where what you want to call AI or machine learning comes to play. So right now, do a first approximation. If say I go into a game and I put on a headset and I'm in this game, I'm moving around, everybody is seeing the same thing to the first approximation. Imagine in the future world where I put on one of these devices, and now what I'm seeing, because I have this ability to continuously generate new content that is iteratively being improved based on a feedback loop given on how I'm moving through the world, it is personalized to me in a way I want to see the world. And I don't mean in a dystopian way. I mean in a joyful way, in a way that makes me feel comfortable and engaged. I think that's remarkably exciting. As you may know, I've also worked on world creation tools within VR, and while those are really fun and they're exciting, they're also still pretty hard to do for most people. It's hard to do something, whether it be even just creating a sphere and putting the sphere where you want. It's way harder to say something like, I want my house now to be in virtual reality, and I want you to be able to come over and visit my house. Imagine a future thing where I can take a single picture of my real house, and then the system, the AI ML system, could infer what's behind the house and the contours of it, and I could essentially have an artistic conversation with the AI to help fill in the details. Or what if I wanted to go back to something from my childhood that doesn't even exist anymore? That is another way that I could be in conversation with the AI to help me create these things in a fully immersive way.
So you would say that is as part of AI as a tool to generate the content that populates this virtual world,
Yeah,
either
but
enabling
specifically around personalization. Yeah,
exactly
I
right.
think
So
that's the
either
key.
personalized, or something that could just be right personalized. Also, your own house. Right now,
Yeah,
understand what
yeah,
you mean. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and personalization has lots of different vectors. If we even take it out of the fully immersive, when we think of something as uh, something like e-commerce, because people do buy things. I found that people actually go on the web and they buy things occasionally. Uh,
Seems
Gen AI has a big role to play there. So maybe I'm looking at some object, whether it be a shoe, whether it be a new coffee maker, something else, but I want to see what would it look like, as a consumer. I want to see what would it look like in a different setting. Well, if the e-commerce site didn't take a photograph of that thing in that place, then there's a disconnect. But I now with Gen AI, you can imagine in a future system, I could say, okay, I want to see what this shoe looks like on a basketball blacktop. I want to see what this thing looks like situated in a locker room. I want to see what this looks like in a middle school cafeteria, because those particular contexts, for whatever reason, are important to the consumer. And that's a way. And then, eventually I'll be able to put on the glasses and say, see yourself in an outfit or whatever it is, and decide whether that's something that I want to acquire for my own personal needs.
Yeah, indeed. And I see this as shopping is going to be a pretty big thing as well. Yes, I think personalization, as you mentioned, is a very interesting aspect. I do have one more question, and that is, so how, moving back and looking at the future, how do you think the role of the designer is going to evolve?
So every time a new kind of technology comes out for creatives, there's a lot of hand wringing about job displacement, and I think that's a very important conversation to have. But I think if we look back and we take a deep breath, we actually see what happens is more of a stratification each time a new technology comes out, whether it be something like desktop publishing or photo manipulation or now generative AI, is you will actually open the doors to a much broader group of people to come in and be able to make things. They won't always be the most beautiful things in the world. They won't be things you necessarily are going to put in a museum, but you are going to enable a lot more people to create many more things. Many of those things don't have to have a long lifespan, but they serve a certain purpose. Then there will be a strata of people, whether they're coming out of art school, whether they're working in their basement, whatever, whether they're self-trained, who are really going to take the time and the energy and the soul work to make beautiful things using even the latest technology. And those will coexist. I tend to think of new technologies as being additive as opposed to replacing. So the short answer is more people are going to make more things, but there will still be a differentiation of ultimately of sort of quality and longevity of the different kinds of works that are coming out.
Absolutely, and I think a lot what you said when you mentioned it is very often overused, but the democratization term, right? It is like now many more people could become creative, right? If I can make a 3D model just texting or using an image, then I'm gonna think, oh, I have this 3D model now. How can I move it? And if I can rig it, because, thanks to another AI tool, now I'm like, oh, maybe I can create my own thing. Then I agree. There is certainly going to be a gap between professional and the amateur, let's say, but that
Mm-hmm.
nonetheless allows to broaden the creativity for people for whom before it was simply inaccessible
Right.
in many ways. And that is really what a lot of what excites me with technologies as a whole, because I jumped into XR really because it allowed me to start creating without having the technical knowledge. And I feel like really the same with AI and with all the great things that you guys are pushing to the market. So indeed, I feel it's a very exciting time.
Thank you. I agree.
Daniel, I really wanted to thank you very much for this conversation. Really, I really appreciate it. And what can I say? Is there anything you would like to share with the audience before we leave?
Yeah, I would say that again, as you mentioned in my bio, I think being able to hold contradictions is really important here. So on one hand, we have new capabilities in terms of being able to do things at scale that we haven't had before. On the other hand, people have always been able to make, whether it be paintings in a cave or now in front of, putting on a headset and doing something, we've always been able to make. And both of those are true at the same time. Other interesting contradictions to wrestle with that I mentioned before were around, tensions between trust and convenience. I think that's a good thing to think about. I think people should think about, what is the purpose of what they are making and how will it be received? Those are the things I'd really love people to take away from this as we go
Daniel,
along
thank
for this very fast ride. So,
Oh my God, it's gonna be very fast, but that's what also makes it exciting, right? And I think we're gonna break things, we're gonna learn things, we're gonna make new things, and that's also what makes us human to some extent.
yeah, and maybe as a parent of children, we have healthy conversations about what areas they may want to learn about or engage in that they can continue to find value in their own humanness. So,
Thank you very much, Daniel, for this great conversation. It was a real pleasure.
thank you so much.
Thank you really much for listening in. And remember to head to YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and check out more insightful conversation revolving around XR and AI. And if you really like the show, please leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or a thumbs up on YouTube. It really helps me keep doing this and shine the spotlight on the latest and greatest advancement in XR and AI. Till next time.